During the Gulf War, the United States and coalition forces absolutely destroyed Saddam's military and kicked the Iraqis out of Kuwait. Iraq itself was also devastated and nobody liked Saddam Hussein. President George H.W. Bush had given a message to the Iraqi army to topple Saddam Hussein and establish a new government. However, this message was misinterpreted by the Iraqi population and they thought that they were the ones who were supposed to overthrow Saddam Hussein and that they would be backed up by American tanks rolling on Baghdad any day. But Bush had specifically not wanted to send coalition troops so that a power vacuum would not ensue from an external overthrow of Saddam. Iraqi army deserters were probably one of the most common sights in Iraq, as many were conscripts from the Iran-Iraq War and didn't really want to go and fight the Gulf War after already fighting for years against Iran to only achieve a stalemate. On March 1, 1991, one day after the Gulf War ceasefire, a T-72 tank gunner returned home after Iraq's defeat in Kuwait and fired a shell into a gigantic portrait of Saddam Hussein hanging over Basra's main square, and onlooking soldiers applauded him. The revolt in Basra was led at first by Muhammad Ibrahim Wali, an army officer who gathered a force of military vehicles to attack the government buildings and prisoners in the city. He was backed by a majority of the city's population, and the uprising in Basra was entirely spontaneous and quite disorganized. In Najaf, a demonstration near the city's great Imam Ali Mosque became a gun battle between army deserters and Saddam's security forces. The rebels seized the shrine as Ba'ath Party officials fled the city or were killed. Prisoners were freed from jails, and the uprising spread within days to all of the largest Shia cities in southern Iraq. The southern Iraqi uprisings were primarily conducted by Shia Iraqis of Skiri, the Badr Brigades, Dawah, and communist parties, as well as the pro-Syrian Baathists, because Syrian Baathism and Iraqi Baathism are completely different, and of course they hate each other. Additionally, the other major faction of the uprisings in the south against Saddam Hussein were the Iraqi army deserters and defectors. The previous Kurdish rebellions against the Ba'athist government during the Iran-Iraq War was met with the Al-Anfal campaign, which saw Saddam Hussein brutally kill from 50 to 182,000 Kurds, primarily through chemical warfare. Needless to say, the Kurds were not the biggest fans of Saddam's government, and also the Kurds had fought many wars to try to get their own autonomous state against Iraq. Kurdish deserters from the Iraqi military were called the Jash, which previously was a term used by Kurdish populations meaning traitor, as it was referring to Kurds who served in the Iraqi National Defense Battalions, Iraqi military, or who were collaborators with the Iraqi regime. The Jash then realigned with the rest of the Kurdish people during the 1991 Kurdish uprisings. In northern Iraq, the Kurdish rebellion saw the Peshmerga, KDP, PUK, CPK, PDKI, Kurdish Mujahideen, and the Jash joined together to rise up against Saddam Hussein's regime. Additionally, there were reportedly 50,000 Iraqi army defectors who joined the rebels in northern Iraq against the Ba'athist government, which further increased the Kurdish forces. Unlike the south, the Kurdish rebellion was preceded by demonstrations with clear political slogans and ideas: democracy for Iraq and an autonomous Kurdistan. After Mosul was taken, Jalal Talabani proposed to march on Baghdad. However, Saddam's loyalist offensive came quickly with support from the Republican Guard, where 50% of their tanks had survived the war. Additionally, the loyalists had helicopter support, while the rebels had little surface-to-air missiles and RPGs, making the rebels essentially defenseless against helicopters. Loyalist helicopters and forces in general would fire indiscriminately into crowds, buildings, and hospitals while arresting people without any charges. But the worst part was the chemical weapons that were used to suppress the populations. Phosgene, sarin, and other nerve agents were used in Basra and Karbala in other cities, but mustard gas attacks also took place in Najaf and Karbala, killing many innocent civilians. Beginning of March 1991, the U.S. and some of the Gulf War allies barred Saddam's forces from conducting jet aircraft attacks by establishing the no-fly zones over northern Iraq and provided humanitarian assistance to the Kurds. On April 17th, U.S. forces began to take control of areas more than 60 miles into Iraq to build camps for Kurdish refugees. However, the last American soldiers left northern Iraq on July 15th. On August 22, 1992, President H.W. Bush announced that U.S. and its allies would establish a second no-fly zone for any Iraqi aircraft south of the 32nd parallel to protect dissidents from attacks by the government as sanctioned by the UN Security Council Resolution 688. These sanctions were aimed at compliance and not regime change, which is something that drastically would change during the Clinton administration. Operation Provide Comfort was also enacted in March of 1991 to defend Kurdish refugees fleeing their homes in northern Iraq in the aftermath of the uprisings and to prevent further reprisals from Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist regime. And of course, it was also aimed to deliver humanitarian aid to the Kurds. The no-fly zone instituted to help bring about would become one of the main factors allowing the development of the autonomous Kurdistan region. U.S. planes often intercepted and destroyed Iraqi aircraft and missile launchers attempting to attack fleeing Kurds. Another aspect to the northern Iraqi rebellion was the Yalova incident where the Turks were stealing medical supplies from the Kurds. In April of 1991, a British Marine unit consisting of about 30 men was tasked with distributing relief supplies to 3,000 Kurds and Assyrians who had fled Iraq in Yalova under the watch of the Turkish military, but they found themselves in direct confrontation with the Turks who were stealing their supplies and did not want to distribute them. The coalition's decision not to intervene and topple Saddam Hussein has been the subject of much debate and controversy. Some suggest that the coalition should have invaded in 1991 with both the hindsight and result of the uprisings and with the knowledge of how much Clinton's sanctions destroyed the country, as well as the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Others argue that the decision not to topple Saddam Hussein prevented a larger power vacuum from occurring, while at the time Iran was seen as a viable threat to take advantage of the weakened Iraqi state. Furthermore, the message for the Iraqis to overthrow Saddam was meant to be a coup by the Iraqi military instead of a public uprising to prevent civilian casualties. Did you know about the Iraqi uprisings during the Gulf War before this video? Do you think that the coalition should have enacted regime change against Saddam Hussein at the end of the Gulf War? Write in the comments, and thank you for watching.